Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain poured relentlessly as Chloe's car sped along the bridge. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from a deep, unsettling feeling that something was wrong. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way the night felt too heavy, the way the wind howled through the windows, or the way the headlights of the cars behind her were becoming more aggressive, pushing closer. Chloe glanced in the rearview mirror. There it was again, the silver BMW, tailing her, always a little too close. It was Derek. She tried to shake off the anxiety. He had been stalking her for weeks now, ever since she left him. He couldn't seem to accept that their relationship was over. But tonight, it felt different. The tension in the air was unbearable. Chloe's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she accelerated. She just needed to get away from him, away from his constant calls and threats. She turned her focus back to the road ahead, but a sudden jolt made her gasp. Her car swerved violently. The BMW had clipped her rear bumper. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She fought to regain control, but the car jerked uncontrollably. The wheels lost traction, the tires screeching against the slick surface. Her breath hitched as she desperately tried to steer. The bridge loomed ahead, the end too close, but the road was slick with rain, and it was no use. Chloe's car slid off the edge of the bridge, her stomach dropped, and everything went black as the vehicle plunged into the cold, unforgiving water below. When Chloe came to, she was disoriented, gasping for air. The crash had been brutal, but somehow, she was alive. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped inside her sinking car. Cold water rushed in. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the rush of water. Then, through the haze of panic, she felt it. Someone's hand gripping her wrist, pulling her with force. A powerful arm wrapped around her waist, dragging her from the car and toward the surface. She gasped for air, spluttering as she broke through the water. Her legs were numb, but she was alive, barely. She looked up, still disoriented, and into the eyes of the man who had saved her. His presence was commanding, almost overwhelming. His dark eyes studied her with intensity, a strange mixture of concern and something darker. He said nothing, but his grip on her tightened, as if he was unwilling to let her go. Chloe's heart raced, but not from fear of the water this time. Something about him, his presence, his strength, made her pulse quicken. The rain was still falling, but his stare didn't waver. She tried to move away, but he held her in place. His voice was low and steady, cutting through the storm. "You're not leaving me." Chloe froze, confused, but also intrigued. Who was this man? And why did it feel like her life had just taken an irreversible turn? Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. After what felt like hours, Chloe finally regained control of her senses. The rain still pelted down in sheets, soaking her to the bone as she shivered in the arms of the man who had saved her. His grip on her was firm, like he would never let go, and for a moment, Chloe couldn't decide whether she was terrified or relieved. Her chest rose and fell with each shaky breath as she tried to piece together what had just happened. She had been falling. Her car had crashed into the cold, black water below the bridge. And then, this man had pulled her out of it. "Who are you?" she finally managed to croak, her voice hoarse from the cold and the fear. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with a steady gaze that made Chloe feel both exposed and protected at the same time. He didn't seem like a hero. He didn't seem like anyone who had any intention of being kind. But there was something about his presence, something that commanded attention and made the world feel as if it were bending to his will. "Don't worry about it," he replied, his voice low and gravelly, the words carrying a foreign accent. "You're safe now." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, to demand answers, but before she could speak, the man was already pulling her toward a dark car that had appeared out of nowhere. His men were there too, standing like silent sentinels, watching as he guided her into the back seat. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She was too cold, too shaken to even make sense of what was happening. She wanted to scream, to fight him, to escape, but everything felt too overwhelming. As the car began to move, Chloe finally found the strength to ask again, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" The man turned his gaze to her, and for the first time, she saw something like amusement in his eyes. "You don't need to know yet," he said simply, "but I'll make sure you're safe. Trust me." Chloe swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. She had never felt so out of control, so helpless. And yet, there was something about him, something undeniable. She couldn't tell if he was a villain or a savior, but for the moment, she had no choice but to go along with it. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets, Chloe's mind raced. Who was this man? What did he want with her? She glanced at the other men in the car. They were all silent, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the late hour and the storm. There was no warmth in their expressions, no comfort. They were just there. The car pulled into a large, gated mansion, its tall walls looming in the distance. Chloe felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape. But she had no idea where she was, and running felt impossible now. The man opened the door for her and helped her out of the car with surprising gentleness. "This is where you'll stay for now," he said. Chloe's heart pounded as she glanced around. The mansion looked like something out of a movie. Massive, imposing, with iron gates and security cameras at every corner. It was like she had stepped into a world she didn't belong to. She pulled her coat tighter around her, feeling a chill that wasn't just from the rain. She tried to pull away from him, but his grip tightened. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly, his voice brokering no argument. "You're mine now, whether you like it or not." Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. Her ex-boyfriend had pushed her off that bridge, but this man, this mafia boss, wasn't just some stranger. He was someone who controlled everything around her. And now, it seemed like her life was in his hands. As they walked toward the mansion's entrance, Chloe could feel his presence behind her like a shadow she couldn't escape. His men moved silently around them, their eyes constantly watching her, waiting for her to make a wrong move. She shuddered as she stepped inside. The mansion was colder than the night outside, its marble floors shining in the dim light. The man led her to a room that felt more like a prison than a guest bedroom. "You'll be staying here," he said. "Get some rest. You're safe here, for now." Chloe didn't respond. She didn't know how. She was too exhausted, too shaken by everything that had happened. But she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. The man's presence was too overwhelming, too powerful. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, and there was no way out. Not now. Not anymore. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe woke up to a strange silence. The bed she was lying in was impossibly soft, the blankets too warm for a room that felt like a prison. She blinked, disoriented, trying to remember where she was. The events from the night before flooded back into her mind like a wave. The crash, the cold water, and then him. The mafia boss who had dragged her from the wreckage. Her heart beat faster as she sat up, the sheets rustling beneath her. She could hear the faint sound of voices outside the room, muffled by thick walls. The mansion was eerily quiet, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, her knees weak from the events that had unfolded. Her clothes were dry, but the dampness of the night still lingered in her skin. She rubbed her arms, trying to calm the shiver that ran down her spine. As she stepped toward the door, she heard footsteps approaching. Her breath caught in her throat as the door opened, and there he was again, the man who had saved her and, in the same breath, trapped her in his world. "You're awake." His voice was low, almost too calm, as he stepped into the room. He was wearing a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, his presence as commanding as ever. Chloe stood frozen in place, unsure of what to say. She had so many questions, but none of them seemed safe to ask. Who was he? What did he want with her? "I didn't ask for your help," she finally said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. The man's expression didn't change. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being sized up, like she was nothing more than a puzzle for him to solve. "You don't have a choice," he replied, his voice cold but not unkind. "You're in my world now, and in my world, I protect what's mine." Chloe flinched at the word. She wasn't anyone's property, and yet, here she was, stuck in a mansion surrounded by people she didn't know, under the control of a man she didn't understand. "I want to leave," she said, her voice firmer this time. "I want to go home." His gaze softened, just for a moment, but then it hardened again, like stone. "You don't know where home is anymore," he said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "You heard things last night. Things that put you in danger." Chloe's stomach twisted. She remembered overhearing something. Something about weapons, something about a deal. But that couldn't be the reason he was keeping her here, could it? "I didn't hear anything," she said quickly, trying to convince herself as much as him. "I don't know what you're talking about." He didn't respond at first. Instead, he took a step closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. Chloe wanted to back away, but her legs felt like they were glued to the floor. "You heard enough," he finally said, his voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "Enough to make you a threat." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. "A threat?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. "You're not a threat to me," he continued, "but you might be to someone else. And that's why you're staying here." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was he really keeping her here because of something she overheard by accident? "I don't belong here," she said, her voice rising in frustration. "I don't want any part of your world." He smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down her spine. "It's too late for that," he said, his tone like steel. "You're already part of it." Chloe stared at him, her mind racing. She didn't know how to escape this, how to get out of this nightmare. But one thing was certain, she was no longer in control. The Mafia boss's eyes darkened. "You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you," he said. "Until I decide what's best for you. Until I decide how you fit into this." Chloe wanted to scream, to fight, but she knew it would do no good. She had no leverage, no allies. She was trapped. But even as she stood there, trapped in his gaze, part of her knew something else. She didn't fully want to leave. There was something about him. Something dangerous, something magnetic. And though she hated to admit it, part of her didn't mind being in his world, at least for now. As if reading her thoughts, the Mafia boss's lips curled into a smirk. "You'll see," he said softly. "You'll see that staying was the only choice you ever had." Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe woke up in the soft, lavish bed, the sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains, casting an almost eerie glow around the room. The sound of the rain had long stopped, but the strange tension in the air was still palpable. She couldn't remember the last time she had slept so soundly, yet it felt like something was missing, like her body was too aware of the danger that lingered. She glanced around the unfamiliar room. The ornate furniture, the thick velvet drapes, the polished floors, it was all so grand, so different from her cramped apartment. But what made her heart race was the overwhelming sense of being watched. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet meeting the cold marble floor. She rubbed her temples, trying to clear the haze from her mind. The events of the night before came rushing back. Her ex, Derek, had chased her. He had tried to kill her, to push her off that bridge. But then, he saved her. The Mafia boss, the man with dark eyes and a quiet intensity. He was the one who pulled her from the wreckage, the one who dragged her out of the cold water. She tried to push the confusion from her mind, but it was impossible. She was still trapped in his world. The door creaked open, and her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the Mafia boss. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the soft light of the hallway. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair perfectly in place, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Chloe wanted to ask so many questions, but she couldn't find the words. What was he doing here? Why was he still keeping her here? She opened her mouth, but he cut her off before she could say anything. "I told you that you're mine now," he said, his voice calm, yet unwavering. Chloe's heart thudded in her chest. "I don't belong to you," she shot back, trying to muster some strength. He raised an eyebrow, not a trace of amusement on his face. "That's not for you to decide," he replied coolly. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, the soft click of the lock echoing in the quiet. Chloe felt a rush of panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Why am I here?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly. "You heard something you weren't supposed to," he replied, walking toward her slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. Chloe took a step back, her back hitting the wall behind her. I didn't hear anything, she insisted, her mind racing. I don't know what you're talking about. He stopped in front of her, his proximity enough to make her heart skip a beat. You don't have to lie to me, he said quietly. I know what you heard, and I know that you're scared. Chloe swallowed hard. I don't even want to be here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to be a part of this. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being examined under a microscope. You're already a part of it, he finally said, his voice cold, but not unkind. Whether you want to be or not. Chloe didn't know how to respond to that. She didn't know how to process everything that was happening. She had been thrown into this world against her will, and now, she was trapped. There was no way out. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek in a gesture that felt surprisingly gentle. Chloe froze, her heart racing. I don't want anything from you, he said, his voice softer now. I'm giving you a choice. She frowned. A choice. You can stay here, stay safe, he said. Or you can leave, and I won't be able to protect you. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. The idea of leaving terrified her. She didn't know the world outside anymore. But at the same time, the thought of staying here, with him, made her uneasy. She was trapped in a mansion with a man who seemed to control everything and everyone around him. What happens if I stay? She asked, her voice barely audible. You'll be safe, he replied simply. You'll be under my protection. No one will hurt you. But there was something in his voice, something that made Chloe question whether the protection he promised would come at too high a cost. And if I leave? She asked, her voice steadier now, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. You'll be on your own, he said, his eyes darkening. And if you think Derek is the only one after you, you're wrong. There are worse people out there. People who won't hesitate to take what they want. Chloe's mind spun as she processed his words. She couldn't escape. She couldn't go back to her old life. But did she have a choice? The silence in the room stretched between them, thick and heavy. I don't belong in your world, Chloe said, shaking her head. I'm not a part of this. He smiled then, a cold, calculating smile that made her stomach turn. You already are, he said softly, and there's no going back. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe stood there, her mind racing, trying to process the man's words. She had been caught in a world she didn't understand, and she had no idea how to escape. The Mafia boss's presence loomed over her like a dark cloud, suffocating and unyielding. She had no choice but to remain in his world, but the thought of staying terrified her more than anything. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. His gaze never wavered, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his footsteps echoing in the silence between them. I told you, he said, his voice low and commanding. You're here because you're mine now. I've decided to protect you, but there's a price. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest. A price? She repeated, her breath catching in her throat. What kind of price? A price you'll understand in time, he replied, his eyes locking onto hers. For now, you'll stay here, and you'll follow my rules. I'll protect you from anyone who wants to harm you, but you need to trust me. Chloe wanted to argue, wanted to scream that she didn't need his protection, but something in his words stopped her. Something in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, told her that defiance wouldn't work. She wasn't in control anymore. What happens if I don't trust you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Mafia boss's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. You don't have a choice, he said. You'll learn to trust me. And in time, you'll see that what I'm offering is more than just safety. It's power. It's control. Chloe felt a shiver run down her spine at the words. Power. Control. Those were the things that ruled this world, and she had no idea how to navigate it. She had no idea what this man was capable of. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to be free until he allowed it. The silence stretched between them as Chloe tried to make sense of everything. The idea of staying in this mansion, in this world, felt wrong. But the alternative was even more terrifying. I want to leave, she said, her voice small and vulnerable. I can't, he replied simply, his voice steady. You've seen too much. You're too valuable to let go. I'm not valuable to you. she shot back, her voice growing stronger. I'm just a person who wants to get out of here. His expression hardened, the warmth fading from his eyes. You're not just a person, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. You're mine, and that means I will protect you, no matter what. If you want to leave, you can try, but I'll be right behind you. Chloe swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in. There was no escape. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no way out, not unless she could somehow gain control of her situation. But how? How could she escape when the man who held the keys to her freedom had already claimed her? What do you want from me? She asked again, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The Mafia boss stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He didn't answer right away, but instead, he reached out and gently touched her face. The gesture was strangely tender, almost intimate, and Chloe flinched at the contact. You'll understand in time, he said softly. For now, all you need to know is that you belong to me. Chloe's heart raced, a wave of panic rising in her chest. She didn't belong to him. She didn't belong to anyone. But in this world, it seemed that she had no choice but to play by his rules. I'm not yours, she said, her voice a whisper, but defiance still burning in her. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, his back to her, and walked toward the door. I'll let you think on it, he said, his voice echoing in the cold silence of the room. But remember this, no matter what you think, you're already a part of this world. And once you're in, there's no getting out. The door clicked shut behind him, and Chloe stood there, frozen in the stillness of the room. She was trapped in a world she didn't belong to, with a man who held all the power. And no matter how hard she fought, no matter how badly she wanted to escape, the truth was clear. She was never going to leave. Not now. Not ever. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe stood by the large, cold windows of the mansion, staring out at the sprawling grounds beyond. The dark clouds still hung low in the sky, threatening more rain. But inside, it was too warm, too quiet, too suffocating. She felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. The soft sounds of footsteps echoed through the hallways, growing closer. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He was always nearby, always watching. The Mafia boss. The man who had claimed her life, body and soul. Chloe had spent the last few days in his mansion, feeling like a stranger in a place that should have made her feel safe. But there was no comfort here, only control. She had never felt so small, so powerless. Every move she made, every step she took, felt like it was being watched. The man never left her alone for long. He had made it clear that he wanted her to stay, to trust him, but Chloe couldn't bring herself to do either. She had no choice. She couldn't leave. But the more time she spent in his presence, the more she wondered if she ever would. She turned as she heard the door to her room open slowly. He stood in the doorway, his dark eyes locking onto hers with that same intense gaze that sent shivers down her spine. He was always so calm, so collected, as if he knew everything about her. And in many ways, he probably did. Chloe couldn't even remember the last time she had been in control of her own life. You're still awake, he said, his voice deep and calm. Couldn't sleep, Chloe replied, her voice quiet but firm. I don't sleep well here. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Chloe's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't move. She couldn't. You're safe here, he said, his tone laced with something that almost resembled reassurance. I've told you that already. Chloe didn't respond. She couldn't bring herself to believe him. Safe? How could she feel safe when her entire world had been turned upside down? She had been living in fear ever since that night on the bridge, when her ex had tried to end her life, and this man had pulled her from the wreckage. She had seen the darkness in his eyes, the way he controlled everything around him. She couldn't trust someone like him. Why don't you believe me? He asked, as if reading her thoughts. You're mine now. You've seen things, heard things. No one will hurt you as long as you're here. Chloe swallowed hard. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. She had seen things she couldn't forget, things that had changed her forever. And now she was bound to him. Her heart pounded as she stood there, the weight of his presence pressing down on her. You're not my protector, she said, her voice shaking slightly. You're just another cage. He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. If you think you're in a cage, you're mistaken, he said quietly. I'm offering you something far more valuable than freedom. I'm offering you security, power, protection. Chloe shook her head, the words stinging her ears. I don't need your protection, she said, her voice growing stronger. I don't need your power. I just want to be left alone. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You don't get to make that choice anymore, Chloe, he said, his voice low and commanding. You're already in my world. And whether you like it or not, you'll have to play by my rules. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the pressure of his gaze, the way he commanded the space around him. There was no escaping him. She was already caught in his web, whether she wanted to be or not. You'll learn to trust me, he continued, his voice softening just slightly. In time, you'll understand that everything I've done for you. To keep you safe. Safe. Chloe whispered, the word foreign on her tongue. I don't feel safe here. Then you're not looking hard enough, he replied. You're safe here with me. As long as you stay by my side, nothing can touch you. Chloe wanted to argue, wanted to fight back, but she knew it was pointless. There was no escaping him. No escaping this life he had thrust her into. And as much as she hated to admit it, part of her felt a strange pull toward him. A pull that terrified her more than anything else. I don't belong here, Chloe said softly, more to herself than to him. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his presence overwhelming. You belong wherever I say you belong, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Chloe's heart raced as he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was surprisingly tender, but there was no mistaking the power behind it. She was his, and she didn't know how to fight that. You'll see, Chloe, he said, his gaze locking onto hers. You'll see that staying with me is the only choice you'll ever have. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe didn't sleep that night. The soft, cold sheets seemed to press against her skin like a constant reminder of the man who controlled every corner of her life now. She stared at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, but one question kept rising above all the others. Why was he keeping her here? Why her? She had never asked for this, never wanted to be involved in his world. But here she was, trapped in a mansion, surrounded by men she didn't know, and at the mercy of a man who had already claimed her. The thoughts twisted in her mind, and she couldn't find peace. The sound of a knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. She didn't have to guess who it was. He was always near, always watching. Come in, Chloe called, her voice barely above a whisper. The door opened, and there he was. The Mafia boss, the man who had saved her life, and in the same breath, destroyed it. He looked as calm and controlled as ever, his presence filling the room with the same heavy energy that always followed him. You're awake, he said, his voice deep, a trace of curiosity hidden beneath the stoic facade. I couldn't sleep, Chloe replied, not looking at him. She wasn't sure if she wanted to look at him right now. I haven't slept well since everything. He didn't respond right away, but she could feel his eyes on her, reading her. Chloe was used to this by now the way. He seemed to see right through her, into the core of who she was. You'll get used to it, he said, his words gentle but firm. You'll get used to being here, to being mine. The words stung, even though she had heard them before. She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to argue, to scream, to tell him that she was no one's property. But another part of her, a part she hated to admit, wondered if he was right. If she would eventually accept this life. If she would have no choice but to belong to him. I don't belong to you, she finally said, her voice shaky but resolute. She turned to face him, forcing herself to meet his gaze. You don't get to own me. You don't get to decide my life. The Mafia boss didn't flinch, didn't even seem surprised. He just looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable, his face as stoic as ever. I didn't ask for your permission, he said quietly, his voice carrying that same quiet authority that always made her blood run cold. But you're here now. You're mine. Chloe took a step back, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run out of this mansion and never look back. But where could she go? She was trapped in his world now, a world she didn't understand, a world that terrified her. You can't keep me here forever, she said, her voice breaking as she fought back the panic that threatened to rise. I'll leave. I'll find a way out. The Mafia boss stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his body blocking the doorway. "You won't," he said softly, but with an edge that sent a chill through her. "I won't let you." Chloe felt her heart race. The tension between them grew thick, suffocating, and for a moment, she was sure she was going to suffocate under it. "You're scared," he said, his voice low, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "You're scared of what I can do, of what I might make you do." Chloe swallowed hard, nodding slightly. She was scared, but it wasn't just of him. It was of everything. The unknowns, the power he held over her, the fact that she had no choice. "I don't want to be here," she said quietly, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Chloe tensed at the touch, but didn't pull away. "I know you don't," he said softly, his voice almost gentle. "But you're here now, and you'll learn to accept it." The words sent a shiver through her. She wanted to push him away, to fight, but there was a part of her that didn't. A part of her that needed him, and that scared her more than anything. "What happens now?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible as she looked up at him. He smiled then, a small, knowing smile that sent a jolt of uncertainty through her. "Now," he said, his voice quiet and deliberate, "you stay, and you'll learn that I'm the only one who can protect you, the only one who can keep you safe." The words felt like a warning, but Chloe wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. He was right. She had no control. She had no power here. "You'll learn to trust me, Chloe," he said softly, his voice almost coaxing, like he was trying to reassure her. "In time, you'll understand that I'm the only person who truly understands what you need." Chloe closed her eyes, trying to block out the swirling thoughts in her mind. She didn't know what to believe anymore. She didn't know who she could trust. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had no choice but to trust him. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe could feel her heart racing as she stood in the middle of the grand hall, surrounded by luxury and the weight of the decisions she had made. The house was still, but the silence was heavy, like the calm before a storm. It was clear now that there was no turning back. The door to her room had been left ajar, and in the reflection of the ornate mirrors lining the hallway, she could see the silhouette of the man who had come to dominate her world. He had saved her life, pulled her from the wreckage, and dragged her into a life she didn't want. And now, he stood in front of her like a king waiting for her surrender. His gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. There was no question in his eyes. There was no doubt. He had claimed her, and she would never be free again. "Are you ready to accept your place?" His voice was low, commanding, but with an edge of something softer beneath it. Chloe couldn't bring herself to speak. What was there left to say? She had seen too much, heard too much. She had no choice now. She was tangled in his web, and he had no intention of letting her go. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't have to ask for it," he replied, his words smooth like velvet, but sharp like a blade. "You're already here, and you're mine now. That's all there is to it." Chloe's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the walls closing in around her. This wasn't the life she had chosen. She had always been independent, always been in control. But now, she was nothing but a pawn in a world where control was the only thing that mattered. "You can't control me," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. The Mafia boss smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made her blood run cold. "I don't need to control you, Chloe," he said softly, stepping closer to her. "You're already under my protection. That's enough." "Protection?" Chloe repeated, her voice rising with frustration. "What protection? You keep me locked up in this mansion, surrounded by your men. I don't need your protection. I need to be free." The man's eyes darkened, and he took another step toward her, his presence overwhelming. "Freedom is an illusion," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You don't know what freedom truly is. You don't know what it costs to have the kind of power I have." Chloe stood her ground, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I don't want your power," she said firmly. "I just want to be free." He reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek in a gesture that was oddly gentle. She flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. "You're free," he said softly, his fingers tracing her jawline. "You're free as long as you stay with me. You're mine. And that's all that matters." Chloe shook her head, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She wanted to leave, to run far away from this life, but she knew it was impossible. The man was right about one thing. She had seen too much, and there was no way out. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled again, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the smile of a man who had already won. "I want you to understand that you belong to me," he said, his voice cold but not unkind. "I want you to see that I'm the only one who can protect you. The only one who can keep you safe in this world." Chloe couldn't speak. She couldn't argue with him anymore. The truth was, she didn't know what to do. She was trapped, caught in his world, and every attempt to break free only made the chains tighter. The Mafia boss took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "I'll give you time to adjust," he said softly, his voice almost soothing. "But don't mistake that for weakness. You're mine, Chloe, and that will never change." Chloe felt a lump form in her throat as she stared at him. There was no escaping this world. No escaping him. She had already given up everything just by being here. And now, she had to make a choice. "You don't have to like it," he continued, his voice almost a whisper now. "But you will learn to trust me. You'll learn that I'm the only one who can give you what you need. The only one who can make you feel safe again." Chloe's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She couldn't. She had lost everything she once knew. And now, she was standing here, in the arms of a man who owned her soul. "You're not leaving me," he said, his voice final, leaving no room for argument. "You're staying with me, and you'll learn to trust that." Chloe closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words crash over her. There was no going back. She was his, and that was the only truth she had left. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe woke up to the soft morning light streaming through the massive windows of her room. The rain from the night before had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and tension. The mansion was eerily quiet, and she had spent the entire night tossing and turning, her thoughts swirling around the man who had become an unwelcome fixture in her life. The man who had saved her and, in the same breath, trapped her in his world. His words echoed in her mind. "You're mine now." She had tried to push them away, but they lingered, haunting her. Every corner of the house, every step she took, felt like it was under his watchful eyes. She was stuck in a gilded cage, a life she never asked for. But the longer she stayed in the mansion, the more she realized that it wasn't just his power she had to fear. It was the pull he had on her, how easy it was to start questioning her own resistance. He had made her feel safe, but at what cost? What kind of safety was it when she was constantly aware that she had no control over her own life? She didn't want to admit it, but deep down, a part of her was beginning to trust him. Trust that he would protect her. Trust that he would keep her safe. But trust also meant dependence, and that was something Chloe could never fully allow herself. As the day wore on, Chloe found herself trapped in a constant back-and-forth battle between wanting to break free and accepting the reality that there was no escape. There was no going back to the life she once knew. The life outside these walls was no longer hers, and it terrified her. She had heard enough to understand the kind of man he was. Powerful, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to maintain control. He had the kind of reach that made her feel small and insignificant. He had the kind of eyes that saw everything, that never missed a thing. But there was something else there too, something more complex. His gaze wasn't just cold and calculating. It was possessive. Chloe didn't know what to make of it. It made her feel both wanted and trapped. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing at the large windows again, gazing out at the manicured grounds. She hadn't realized how much time had passed until the sound of footsteps reached her ears. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She had become too familiar with his presence. He entered the room, his footsteps soft yet purposeful, his body exuding confidence and control. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching her as if he could see everything she was thinking. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice low and smooth. "What's on your mind?" Chloe didn't turn to face him. She couldn't. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing the confusion that lingered in her eyes. "Nothing," she said, her voice steady. "Just trying to figure out what comes next." His lips curved into a smile that sent a chill through her. He was always so sure, so confident, as if he held all the answers. You already know what comes next, he said. You stay with me. You'll learn to understand your place here. Chloe shook her head, though she wasn't sure why. It wasn't like she had any other option. But the idea of fully accepting it, fully surrendering to him, felt wrong. She had never been one to rely on anyone. She had always valued her independence, her freedom. Now, both felt like distant memories. You think you have control over me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, the sound of his shoes on the marble floor echoing in the quiet room. It's not about control, Chloe, he said, his voice almost gentle. It's about understanding the truth. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to protect you, to keep you safe. Chloe's heart clenched at the words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything he was offering was genuine. But there was a part of her, a part she couldn't ignore, that feared what trusting him would mean. And what do you get out of it? She asked, finally turning to face him. What's the real reason you're keeping me here? He looked at her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. You're more valuable than you realize, he said, his voice calm but firm. And I don't let valuable things go, not without a reason. The words hung in the air like a threat, and Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was more scared of the man or the reality he had created around her. She had no control, no freedom. She was nothing more than a piece in his game. And yet, part of her wanted to stay. I'm not a piece to be controlled, she said, her voice growing stronger. I'm a person, and I want to make my own choices. His expression softened, but only for a moment. You're right, he said quietly. You are a person, but in this world, sometimes, you don't get to make your own choices. Not until you understand the rules of the game. Chloe felt a shiver run down her spine. There it was again. That feeling of being caught in a world that wasn't hers. A world where the rules were set by someone else. And no matter how much she fought, no matter how much she wanted to break free, she knew deep down that she was trapped. And somehow, he had made her believe that this was the only way to survive. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe sat in the large, extravagant living room, staring blankly at the fire crackling in the hearth. The flames danced with an unsettling rhythm, much like the thoughts racing through her mind. She had been here for days now, trapped in a life she never asked for, a life that she was slowly starting to accept. But it wasn't just the luxury or the constant surveillance that unnerved her. It was the power he held over her. He had made it clear that she belonged to him, and despite her best efforts to deny it, she couldn't help but wonder if she was starting to believe it. The days blurred together in a haze of opulence, fear, and frustration. She was still trying to process what had happened, why she was here, and what she was supposed to do now. The Mafia boss, the man who had saved her life and trapped her in his world, had told her that she was under his protection. He had promised her safety, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that it came with a price she wasn't ready to pay. Every day, he hovered around her, his presence overwhelming. She could feel his eyes on her even when he wasn't in the room. She had no privacy, no space of her own. She was always under his watch, and it was suffocating. But what scared her the most wasn't his control. It was the way she had started to respond to him. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized that she had become accustomed to his presence, to the strange comfort he provided. She hated herself for it. She didn't want to need him. She didn't want to be dependent on someone who controlled every aspect of her life. But every time she tried to leave or rebel, something inside her hesitated. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Maybe it was the way he made her feel safe, in a twisted, possessive way. Whatever it was, it kept her there, anchored in his world. Chloe wasn't sure if it was fear, desire, or something else entirely that kept her from walking away. She had tried. She had tried to break free, but there was nowhere to run. Every door was locked, every window barred. The Mafia boss had made it clear that she was his, and nothing would change that. She didn't want to admit it, but she had already begun to accept it. She was stuck here, and the worst part was that, deep down, a part of her didn't want to leave. As if reading her thoughts, the door to the room opened. She looked up to see him standing there, his presence filling the doorway. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching her with those piercing eyes. "You've been quiet today," he said finally, his voice smooth, almost affectionate. "What's on your mind?" Chloe didn't respond immediately. What was there to say? She had been so lost in her own thoughts, so consumed by the heaviness of the situation, that she hadn't realized how much time had passed. She couldn't bring herself to look at him, but she could feel him drawing closer. "I'm thinking about everything," she said softly, almost to herself. "About how everything changed. How I ended up here." "You're here because you're meant to be," he replied, his voice low, but with an underlying firmness. "You belong here with me. It's where you're safe." Chloe's stomach twisted at his words. She didn't want to belong to him. She didn't want to need him. But the more she fought the feeling, the more it seemed to settle in her chest. "Safe?" she whispered. "How can I be safe when I'm trapped?" He stepped forward, his shadow falling across her, enveloping her in his presence. He crouched down in front of her, his face now inches from hers. "You're not trapped, Chloe," he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're protected. There's a difference." She could feel her pulse quicken, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to pull away, to run, but she couldn't. He had this hold on her, this pull that she couldn't escape. "I don't want to be protected by you," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't want this life." He smiled then, the kind of smile that sent a chill down her spine. "You don't get to choose, Chloe," he said, his voice gentle, but with an unmistakable finality. "You're already mine. And that means everything I do is for you. To keep you safe. To make sure nothing can hurt you." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy blanket. She didn't want to accept it. She didn't want to believe that she was bound to him, to this world. But the more she fought it, the more she realized that she didn't have a choice. She had already lost. "You're mine now, Chloe," he said again, his voice like a whisper, but carrying all the weight of a promise. "And nothing will ever change that." Chloe didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too painful. She had already given in. And the worst part was, she didn't know if she wanted to leave anymore. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe sat alone in the grand dining room, the massive table in front of her untouched. She hadn't eaten much in the past few days, her stomach constantly twisted in knots. She was learning how to live in this gilded prison, but she didn't want to. Her mind was full of questions, and every time she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing but control. The Mafia boss, the man who had come into her life without warning, had saved her and ruined her in the same breath. His presence was overwhelming, his words suffocating. He was always near, always watching, always in control. She had tried to resist, to fight back, but the longer she stayed here, the more she realized there was no escape. She had no power. She had no choice. And that terrified her. Chloe had always prided herself on her independence. She had been strong, always capable of taking care of herself. But now, she felt small and weak, a prisoner in her own life. She couldn't even go for a walk without one of his men following her. The mansion was her prison, and the Mafia boss was her warden. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. His presence was like a shadow, always lingering, always there. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice smooth as always. Chloe didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure what to say anymore. "I'm thinking," she said finally, her voice low, "about everything." He stepped closer, his footsteps silent on the marble floors. "You're not alone here," he said softly, his eyes darkening as he took a seat beside her. "You never have to be." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to hear that. She didn't want to need him. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't want to need you." He didn't flinch. "You don't have a choice, Chloe," he replied, his tone low and commanding. "I told you before. You're mine now. And that means everything I do is for you." Chloe felt her breath catch in her throat. The words were suffocating. "I don't want to be yours," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You already are," he said, his voice soft but full of conviction. "There's no going back. You're here. And you're safe. With me." Chloe wanted to scream, to push him away, but she couldn't. His presence was too powerful. The more she fought, the more she realized that she had already surrendered. There was no escaping him. There was no escaping this life. "You think I want this?" Chloe said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want your protection. I don't want to be controlled." He reached out then, his hand brushing lightly over her cheek. The touch sent a wave of heat through her, but she pulled back instinctively. "It's not about control," he said quietly. "It's about keeping you safe." About giving you a life where you never have to worry about anything again. Chloe shook her head, the confusion swirling in her chest. I don't need a life like that, she said, her voice cracking. I need to be free. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Freedom, he said slowly, is an illusion. You're free here. Free from the fear, free from the pain, free from everything that's been holding you back. Chloe felt tears sting her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want him to see her weakness. You think you can just take over my life like this? She asked, her voice rising. You think I'll just fall in line? He leaned closer then, his face inches from hers. You don't have to fall in line, he said, his voice low and soothing. But you will. You'll see that this is the only life worth living. The only life that matters. Chloe wanted to push him away, to fight him, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had no choice. She couldn't go back to the life she once had. She couldn't escape. She was already too deep. The walls were closing in, and the more she tried to fight, the more she felt herself being pulled under. She had already lost. I can't keep living like this, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I can't keep pretending this is okay. His gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw something like sympathy in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold determination. You'll learn to live with it, he said softly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You'll learn to trust me. And when you do, you'll understand that this is the only way. Chloe closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. She couldn't fight anymore. She couldn't escape. She was his, and she didn't know if she would ever be free again. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe woke up to the sound of soft footsteps echoing in the hall outside her room. She hadn't slept well, the sheets tangled around her, the weight of the past few days pressing on her chest. The mansion was quiet, but it felt like the walls were closing in. Every glance she stole toward the door reminded her of the man who had taken over her life, and it seemed impossible to break free. The longer she stayed, the more she felt herself being drawn into his world, a world where power and control ruled everything. The world he had promised to protect her in. But Chloe wasn't sure she wanted that protection anymore. She wasn't sure she wanted to belong to him. The decision to stay, to accept what had happened, felt like one she didn't get to make. She had been swept into it, and now, she was trapped. Chloe pulled herself out of bed, her feet cold against the marble floors. She walked slowly to the window and looked out at the vast grounds of the mansion. The sprawling lawns, the stone fountains, the high walls, they were all beautiful, but they felt like a prison. She was a prisoner in a world she didn't understand, under the watchful eyes of a man who made sure she had no escape. I don't belong here, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. But the truth was, she wasn't sure where she did belong anymore. Everything outside this place felt foreign now. A knock at the door broke her from her thoughts, and her heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was without needing to check. His presence was always near, always watching. Chloe hesitated before opening the door. She couldn't bring herself to face him, but she couldn't run away either. The door swung open, and there he stood, the Mafia boss. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and Chloe felt the familiar rush of anxiety spread through her chest. You're awake, he said simply, his tone neutral, as if nothing had changed between them. She didn't answer right away. What was there to say? What was the point of talking when every conversation felt like a negotiation? I was thinking, Chloe said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. About what comes next. The man stepped closer, his presence filling the doorway, and Chloe immediately felt the air grow thicker, like she was being pulled into something from which there was no escape. What comes next? He repeated, almost as if amused. You stay here, he said, his voice dropping. You learn to accept what's happened. Chloe's heart thudded. I don't want to accept this, she said, her voice breaking. I want to leave. I want to go back to my life. The Mafia boss tilted his head slightly, studying her with those cold, calculating eyes. You don't have a life to go back to anymore, Chloe, he said softly, yet the words carried an undeniable weight. Your old life is gone. It's just you and me now. The way he said it, so final, made her feel as though she had no other choice. Her chest tightened as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. You don't get to decide my life, she snapped, surprising herself with the fire in her voice. The Mafia boss didn't flinch. I already have, he replied calmly. I've decided your life, Chloe. And now, I'm giving you a chance to be a part of something bigger. To be safe. His words, however smooth, carried the same chill as the mansion walls. She was safe, but only because he allowed it. She had nothing left to hold on to accept him. Safe. Chloe repeated. I don't feel safe. I feel trapped. You're not trapped, he said, stepping closer, his voice low, his gaze never leaving hers. You're protected. There's a difference. Chloe shook her head, the overwhelming sense of helplessness washing over her again. I don't need your protection. I never did. I just want my life back. The Mafia boss looked at her with something that could almost be called sympathy. Your life was never yours to begin with, he said softly, his voice unusually gentle. But now, you're with me. And that's the only thing that matters. Chloe could feel the walls of the room closing in on her. She wanted to fight, to scream, but all she could do was stand there, unable to move. She wasn't sure if she was more terrified of him or of what she was becoming. Was she truly becoming dependent on him? Was this really the life she was going to live? The Mafia boss reached out then, his hand brushing gently against her cheek. It was a soft touch, intimate in a way that made Chloe's heart race. But it was also possessive, and she recoiled slightly. You'll see, Chloe, he said, his voice low and compelling. You'll see that in time, you won't want to leave. You'll understand that this is where you belong. With me. Chloe closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She didn't know how to escape this. She didn't know how to fight him anymore. He had won, and the worst part was, a part of her was starting to accept it. The life she had once fought for was slipping away, and there was nothing left to hold on to but the man who had taken it from her. And as much as she hated it, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. She was his, and there was no going back. Her ex made her car fall off the bridge. The Mafia boss grabbed her hand and never let her go. Chloe sat by the window, the rain tapping gently against the glass. The world outside seemed so far away, as if she had been pulled into another reality entirely. The mansion, with its tall stone walls and towering gates, felt like a fortress, her fortress now, and she had no way out. The life she once knew, the life she had fought so hard to create, was a distant memory. She had become a part of his world, whether she wanted to or not. The Mafia boss had made sure of that. His presence was a constant shadow over her, suffocating in its intensity. She was his. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, it settled in her chest like a heavy weight. She had no freedom, no choices. She was at his mercy. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel him, always just a few steps behind. You're thinking too much, he said softly, his voice steady. Chloe didn't answer. She couldn't. He was right. Her mind had been racing, her thoughts tangled in a web of fear and desire, anger and acceptance. She didn't know what to believe anymore. She didn't know where she stood in this strange, twisted life he had pulled her into. She didn't know if she was even capable of escaping it. You don't have to be afraid, he said, his voice like a lullaby, but there was no comfort in it. I've told you. You're mine. And that means you're protected. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with confusion and frustration. Protected? She repeated bitterly. Is that what you call this? Locking me up in this house, controlling everything I do. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You don't understand, he said, his voice calm but firm. I protect what's mine. And you're mine now. You're safe. The word safe hung in the air between them like a threat. She had never wanted to feel protected by him. She had never wanted to need him. But here she was, trapped, surrounded by luxury and fear. I don't need your protection, she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. I don't need you. The Mafia boss's expression didn't change. He didn't react to her words, but there was something in his eyes that made Chloe feel like she was already caught. You don't have a choice, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of finality. You're already a part of this. You're mine, and nothing can change that. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't deny it. She was his. She had been for a long time now, whether she admitted it or not. He had taken control of her life, and there was nothing left for her to hold on to. You're not leaving me, he said again, his voice steady and unwavering. You're here, and you're going to stay. And you'll learn to trust that. Chloe felt a lump form in her throat. She had tried to fight, tried to run, but there was no escaping him. No escaping this life. The moment she had stepped into his world, she had lost everything. And now, the only choice left was to accept it. She couldn't fight him. She couldn't win. She was his, and he had made sure of it. The Mafia boss reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek with surprising tenderness. She flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. She didn't have the strength to anymore. You'll learn to trust me, Chloe, he said softly, his eyes darkening with something unreadable. And when you do, you'll understand that I've always done what's best for you. I've always protected you. Chloe closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream that she didn't need him, that she didn't want to be a part of this life. But deep down, she knew it was pointless. She had already been claimed. There was no going back. I'll never belong to you, she said softly, but even as the words left her lips, she felt the emptiness of them. She already did belong to him. She had for far too long. He smiled then, a smile that wasn't kind or comforting, but knowing, as if he had already won. You already do, he said, his voice low and soft. And you always will. Chloe didn't know how much time passed before she finally found the strength to leave the room. She didn't know where she was going, or if she was even allowed to leave. But as she walked down the long, empty hallways, she realized something. She had stopped fighting. She had stopped resisting. She had already given in to him, to this life, to the world he had created for her. And somewhere deep inside, a part of her knew that she was never going to escape it. She was his, and that was the only truth left. In this gripping dark romance, Chloe finds herself trapped in a world of luxury and control after a life-changing accident. Her ex tried to take her life, but it was a mysterious mafia boss who saved her, only to pull her deeper into a dangerous world where power and control reign. As Chloe struggles with her emotions, she realizes that this dark romance is more than just a fight for freedom. It's a fight for survival in a life where she has no control. With every moment spent in the mansion, Chloe's resistance weakens as she faces the undeniable truth. She's become part of his world, and there's no turning back. This dark romance forces her to confront her deepest fears, her desires, and the power dynamics that threaten to consume her. With every interaction, Chloe is drawn closer to a man who claims her, body and soul, and she must decide whether to submit to the inevitable or fight back against the oppressive control he holds over her. Will Chloe escape this dark romance, or will she fall deeper into the mafia boss's grip? The tension builds as Chloe navigates a dangerous world where freedom seems like an impossible dream, and trust may be the most dangerous choice of all.